Hello, everybody. Welcome to Empowered Through Compassion Season 2. My name is David Politi. I'm your host. I'm so excited that I'm at Season 2 with all of you, along with really wise, insightful, amazing guests. In this season, I'm going to be looking at popular culture and specifically TV and movies and see if we can deconstruct some of them with IFS, EMDR. Spoiler alert. If we are talking about a show and you have not seen it and you don't want us to ruin the ending, please watch the show first. Please note this podcast should not be a substitute for therapy. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Empowered Through Compassion. I'm so happy that you're here. I'm really excited. I have Jennifer Blanchette with me, and she is a go-to person when it comes to burnout. And so I'm really thrilled that you're a part of this, and we're gonna have so much fun. And so, Jennifer, if you could maybe introduce yourself and how you got into this realm of helping people understand within themselves what it feels like to feel burned out and what to do about it when they do get burned out with their job or with things in their life.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So, I am Dr. Jen Blanchette. I host a therapist burnout podcast, and I have found my way to doing this kind of this circuitous route. I launched another podcast in 2021, which was TBI Therapist. And so when I was in practice, I'm not practicing as a therapist anymore, but when I worked with folks after TBI and concussion. So I've been working with overwhelmed people pretty much my whole career from a TBI perspective. And I still do evaluations in the school, even though I don't work as a therapist. So that's kind of what I do now in podcasting. But I started that other podcast because I just felt like no one really knew a lot about how to do therapy with folks after a TBI. And so when people came to me, they were just like, no one gets this. You need to like tell the world more about it. And so I did that while I was in the midst of burnout. In the back of my mind, I had kind of this inkling that I would do something with regard to therapist burnout, but I felt like I was in it at the time. So I guess I didn't give myself permission to totally delve into that at that point in
Can
time.
I
And
can I
so,
maybe just
yeah,
interrupt for a
go.
second and please, I want you to continue. This is my
Mhm.
interrupting to say a little joke here. But I love podcasting, and I feel like sometimes the quickest route to burnout is through a podcast because they are a lot of work.
Do you know what my mantra is?
No.
You can't burn out of your burnout podcast.
I love it. I love it.
I say it all the time because I think, we think, oh yeah, let's do a podcast, and there's a lot of energy into that, and they have this thing called pod fading that most podcasts end after 7 episodes because it's hard. It is hard. It's a lot of work, and I think there has to be passion to do it because otherwise you won't continue it. 100%.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the process of doing TBI therapist, I just kind of got to this point where I realized I had been in burnout. In 2021, I said to my therapist, I don't know if I want to be a therapist anymore. And, cried really, really hot tears. And then it kind of unfolded over the next 2 years, really, for me to figure out. And it really wasn't until I got to a point where I really looked at the numbers. I did some basic math and found out the exchange really wasn't working for me anymore. It just wasn't working. And when I got a contract job to do evaluations, I looked at that money, which would replace my therapy income, and I was like, done. And I closed. So it really, therapists always ask me this question, like, how do I start? Like, I know I can't do one-to-one. I know I need to get out of this. And I'm like, basic math is step one. So let's look at your numbers because I think a lot of therapists don't think in this way. They don't think, what is that exchange for actually what I'm getting from my work as a therapist? Does that really equal the energy expenditure that I give in the room? Is that working for me? Period. So I kind of ask therapists this question. Is this working for you? And if you need permission to leave, I grant it. You can leave. You can do something else because I think the antithesis of burnout is it being alive. And that's what I want so much for therapists. I feel like a lot of therapists who get to this point, we give, we give so many parts of ourselves. I know that's part of this podcast. And it feels like we are so depleted, there's nothing left for us to feel that sense of being alive, of being human. And so, I mean, that's the crux of what I think therapists need, but they can't even figure out how to get there because they're so deep in it. So anyway, I just talked a while.
I love it. That it's so true. I mean that is really true. A lot definitely is coming up for me. But tell me more about how you got into helping people with burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been a through line in my career. So I did a dissertation, way back on compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction. And, kind of had that in the back burner. Always wanted to work, always loved working with other therapists, other professionals. I missed meetings, which is weird, but I'm really good at them. But I've been in like the silo, in my private practice and actually, working within a school setting and being in IEP teams again. I'm just like, wow, I miss being with people like that. That part of me was not able to come out as a, private practice therapist. Uh, so, I mean, I think just kind of exploring and opening this has been great for me. But I think the impetus really was the podcast. I just felt like I had to tell my story and I knew that other people felt the way I felt. And I didn't see the resources available to therapists. There's prevention based burnout, where they're like, let's stop burnout from happening. What I find when I talk to therapists, they need burnout recovery. So, burnout prevention looks like self care, it looks like stress management. Burnout recovery looks like that deep nervous system regulation that we need when we've been at a chronic level of stress for many, many years. And I think it's the zeitgeist of our time as well. Like 66% of workers say that they feel some level of burnout. And for therapists, that's between 30 and 70%, depending on the study, depending on, what you're looking at, what type of population therapists are seeing and things of that nature. And it seemed to be much higher, like in the midst of the pandemic. So I think what I wanted to get out is that if you can't do this work anymore, that it's okay. Because I feel like when therapists reach that level of burnout, they hear from others, even in the field. And I've heard this time and time again from my clients, my therapist coaching clients, not therapy clients, that other therapists tell them, like, well, have you like done some yoga? Have you tried to change your caseload? Did you go full fee? Did you do X, Y, and Z? When they're like, I am drowning and no one gets it. No one is hearing me that I can't do this way anymore. So it really is like needing to change the whole paradigm for many therapists.
So as you're talking, there's a couple of parts coming up inside of me. One is just happy that you're here and what you're saying feels very valuable. And then there's another part of me that's like, I want to be like a client to you and ask you questions. And I'm wondering if I ask you some things,
Yeah.
if it might resonate with the audience and it might resonate with other people and with you, it might kind of bring up other people that you've been with, that you sat with. And
Mm.
if you get it, if you get this in your office and how you respond to it. As a therapist, I mean, I definitely love my work and I'm excited about it. I also resonate with the fact that, although I don't feel I'm burned out, I do feel like it does creep into my life, take over a lot of time. And I wonder how many people feel like, well, okay, first of all the demands on our time, right? Like we have so many demands, and our culture has so many things that it wants us to do 101 things by yesterday. So we have all of this pressure, and I have a daughter, so and then so my wife and I are tag teaming and taking her to school and whatnot, and then so we also have our job. And in our job, in some ways, I feel my identity is aligned with my job, right? And even, and
Mm.
again, I try to fight this, but I think sometimes within this culture, it's very easy to slide into this place where you feel almost as if you're defined by the productivity within your job. How many hours am I spending? How hard am I working? Those things show like in a way, like how good I am, how good I'm doing, what a good person I am. And then when you say you're giving somebody this relief of, well, maybe we could find something else. Maybe there is it, you don't have to be in this rat race. My fear part comes up and says, well, what the hell else could I do? Like, what else is
Mhm.
there? And I can't give this up. I've invested schooling, I've invested time, I've invested ba 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 ba. Oh my God, I'm walking into the abyss. I don't have anything to offer. And then what's going to be a part of me? I'm going to have nothing that I could give to my family. So here,
Mhm.
I just gave all of my fears. I threw them out to you. How would you respond to somebody who gave all of that to you?
So common. I feel like it's a similar story and a story that I've walked out, right? So I feel like when I got to the point where I was closing, that for me, that identity, when I first said, I don't know if I want to be a therapist anymore, that was so heavy for me to say that because that was tied to me, right? I started a practice when, like, my story of starting my practice was even out of like desperation in some ways because my first son had heart surgery and I couldn't go back to work because they wanted me to be back full time. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I launch a private practice and it worked for a while. And I was really proud of it. I was really proud that I, got through the trauma of like this traumatic situation and birth with my son and like built a website on WordPress. Like, all right, we won't even go there because therapists today, like you have Squarespace and all this, like I can't. Uh, did that. And so the sunk cost fallacy, I think, is heavy in my mind. Like we've invested all this time. It's like, what, yeah, what else could I do? And so that fear part is strong. It was strong in me. And it's strong, I think, for a lot of therapists. That's the question they often ask me. What else can I do? They want to know, what is it, Jen? Tell me. Like, is it, working at a library? Is it HR? Is it, and I can't answer that question for you. Just like we as therapists cannot provide that to our clients, what the answer is, but help them understand, like, if you're at the point where this bleeds into every part of your life and you don't feel like you can be alive, like you can live strong in your body, in your humanity, and you're dreading every minute of your practice, then you're choosing that. Some part of you is choosing that. And so that's the part I help them explore. And some people, like some clients I work with, if they do want to stay a therapist. And I'm like, great. Like, I'm not trying to get everybody to leave therapy, but most of the people know they're done when I work with them. Or they're like, you know what, I am just burned out. And this is why I need to work on maybe looking at my caseload, looking at how I'm working. And so I think you can do that. That's 100% available. And do that before you decide to quit potentially. Like take a break. That's the first thing if I can recommend anything, take a break, like a significant break if you need it,
Mm.
because then you'll get some clarity. Like then let your body have a moment to kind of figure what part is coming up through all this. And often I just feel like we just keep going. We keep sitting in the chair versus giving ourselves that break, giving ourselves the opportunity to kind of look at all of it and kind of sift like what is this that's coming up in me?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I just went to another training for IFS yesterday, actually, and they keep talking about an IFS, take that pause, slow it down. So, like you said, I don't know why this came up in my head. This is kind of silly, but like you don't know you're on a treadmill if you're on the treadmill, usually. But if you stop, get off the treadmill, take some space, and it's like, oh, I was on the treadmill. This is what it feels like to slow down, to stop. And then you could reassess. Do I want to get back on? Do I want to change the settings? What exactly do I want to do? I feel
Yes.
like so this podcast here this year, I've been grappling with how, if, to what extent I want to do this. And we talked a little bit before
Mhm.
recording about bringing in pop culture. And so I'm going to out you, Jen, but
Yeah.
you and me both are fans of Severance, the TV
Yeah.
show. And it's such a relevant show for this discussion because I feel like for those that don't know the show, and please help me because I don't even know if I'm fully caught up. but it's basically how I see it. And I'm curious how you see it. I see it as a, a group of people who have these parts, and this company has figured out a way to actually divide up their parts. So there's going to be one part that lives their life and has everything that they have in their life. That's going to be, let's call it like their main person. And then they're also going to have another part of them that is their work persona, their work person. And so when they go into work, then in the magical elevator ride, I guess, they forget everything that happened in their life. And it's just that part that just stays at work. And then when they leave work, it's magically the next day and they're back in the elevator, back to doing work. And then their counterpart is just always doing life. And they go into the elevator and then the work is automatically done and they go out and they continue their life. And the premise is these two parts are not allowed to come together. So they're
Yeah.
basically the company is creating DID in a way, I think, for these two parts where there's total amnesia between the
Mm.
one part and the other. And what's fascinating about that, well, let me pause before I say that because I was going to pull in Burnout. But before we pull in Burnout, is that kind of how you see the show as well? And would you add anything to my rendition of how I'm explaining the show?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see this show that way. And so I always go to like the why, like why would they want those parts separate, and it seems like there's this theme with the characters that there is some kind of trauma in their life. Like one character lost his wife, and I think the other characters had certain other things happen, like some we don't know about, but the main character lost his wife. So, it seems like to me, okay, I want to forget something that's happening in my personal life. So they call the innie who's at work, the personality at work is called the innie, and then the person like in the real world is called the outie. Uh, and I think it's an interesting, I'm going to segue into burnout because it's an interesting perspective because I think a lot of times we get touted like balance, like, oh, we just have to balance everything, which is not possible, right? The only way we could balance everything is if we had literally something in our brain that shut off the work life and the out life. But that
Well,
doesn't
and when you
happen.
say balance, I totally hear you. And usually what's spouted with that is also the image of like a seesaw where you have to balance. And really, in my mind, it's more like the cat in the hat who's like on a ball with like a plate, with an umbrella, with another plate and another
Yeah.
plate and some teacups. And like that's what real balancing would look like. And it's, unless you're the cat in the hat, I don't even know if that's possible some of the time.
Yeah. I know. And I borrow like from biofeedback. I love this kind of idea of counterbalance. So sometimes our home life, our outie life, right, is going to mean that's going to take more of our emotional resources or our physical resources. Like when we have, let's say we welcome a new child or we're caretaking for an elder loved one, something of that nature, right? So home life is taking more of our resources. That means that we don't have as much to give at work. If you're working as a therapist, that means probably you're not providing the best therapy because you can't, because home life is taking a lot from you. And so to have that expectation of like, oh yeah, I'm going to show up like, you know, I'm really going to show up this week because
No,
like you
but see
can't.
what you're saying. You're kind of blowing my mind as an American because I'm being sarcastic. But aren't we all commodities where we're working and we need to just be in somewhat way robotic and just be part of the, work ethos of, shut off your emotion, turn it down. When you're in work, focus on work. Are you saying that doesn't work?
I'm saying that doesn't work 100%. I am saying
Wow.
those things. Yeah, but
Yeah,
and
yeah.
interestingly enough, like I feel like as therapists, and this really came up for me after 2 years. Like it'll be 2 years next month that I haven't been a therapist, working as a therapist. Uh, how much we have to hold that vulnerable part back as a therapist. So And we have to do that. It's protective. So we have our protective parts come up, I think, as a therapist. So we're not like totally emotionally like right available. So when we hear trauma, which is normal to have reactions, like my reaction to trauma is typically like girl screaming, like, ah, those types of reactions are natural for me to have. So I really dampened that down when I worked as a therapist. And I, had trauma reactions. So my more emotionally numb, didn't like had a lot of PTSD symptoms that I did not realize until more emotion has started to come back and be available to me in my regular life.
Mm,
And so
interesting.
just didn't realize like over the 20 years of working in mental health how much I had to really hold parts of myself back to not let vulnerable parts be available. And so I think also we want to like dampen down that vulnerable part of ourselves often. And I think this segue to severance, I don't know if we're still on this
No, I'm
parallel.
totally there because I'm like, as you were saying that, I was thinking Severance, Severance, or the big red light, where it was like, isn't that really what Severance, what that company is trying to do, is to say we want to dampen out your feelings so much that you go and have a good life and feel and love and do whatever you want and keep that out of work. And when your work, any part is just all about work. And so we
Yeah.
don't want you thinking about anything else outside of the realm of what you're supposed to be doing here while you're getting a paycheck and doing the tasks that you need to do, which in the show is actually they show at some point it's like completely irrelevant what they're even doing. They're not like
Yeah.
working with people and helping in a way where they're transforming lives. The star of it is punching in random meaningless numbers into the computer. And you're saying, which I really respect, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that you can't do that. You can't divide us up in this way.
Yeah. I think it comes at a cost. The cost is burnout. I think the cost can be heavier than just burnout. For me, I developed panic attacks. So
Hmm.
in the pandemic, I was driving down the highway one day and had sudden panic attacks driving. And I think it was the chronic stress. I think it was, working as a therapist in the pandemic, like changing our work. Like we had to learn how to go online and I had two young kids at home, no
Yeah.
childcare. So I feel like, I could keep it together for a while, but after about a year and a half, and I saw no end in sight. Like, so my body just said full stop. Something has got to give. And so that's, I think, how it developed for me. And so also, depression. I've struggled with depression over the years. And it became very loud, I think, during that time. And I just had an episode drop last week about are you depressed or burned out? Because there are so many overlaps
Oh
with
yeah.
that. And I am shocked by the dearth of resources for therapists who struggle with their own mental health. So I speak about it because I feel like we don't do that as therapists. It's a very taboo and shameful experience is to openly say, I've struggled with panic attacks. I struggle with depression. I had suicidal thoughts at one point, during the pandemic. And I don't have that now. I, have had a therapist and those things, but I think I know therapists struggle with that and feel like a
Yeah,
lack of resources around that
absolutely.
piece. So I feel like the costs can be more heavy than burnout. Like yes, you may not be able to do this work anymore, but also I'm thinking of that person who's listening to this right now and feels like they're at the outer end of themselves potentially and doesn't know which way to turn like I did. And so I think that's who I'm speaking to because I know that that person is there. I mean, people write me all the time and say, I feel hopeless. And
Hmm.
that breaks my heart because I know that that therapist is giving all they can and they feel like they're utterly stuck.
Well, what you bring, which is so refreshingly beautiful, is kind of this sense of if there are people, and there are, if you are one of those people listening that are out there that feels this way, know that you're not alone, and
Yeah.
that there's a huge community of us, and that, probably all of us have some level of this going on inside of us to
Yeah.
whatever degree. And, it almost, what I'm hearing you say is that it's pretty common for all of us to have this and to also have some shame around it and some feelings of
Yeah.
like, I don't want to talk about it because, God, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm not a good therapist? Does it mean I'm not doing good enough to manage these feelings inside of myself? And so there's a lot of that kind of pulling back and hiding some of these parts of ourselves that might be struggling
Hmm.
until you can't do that anymore and until it just explodes.
Yeah. Until things break open, you're like, all right, full surrender, uncle. I will start to like listen to those parts that happen. It burnout does not start from nowhere. It starts as a whisper, like, oh, I don't know if I can work with this client. Like, I feel really stuck in this situation, or I can't take on 7 clients a day or 6 clients a day. I just feel like I want to watch Netflix and like, eat ice cream all night after a day of therapy. So
So a part of me is laughing right now, just a part that's like, yeah, get into pop culture. That would be great. Watch Netflix. But but again, with moderation, right? Like I hear what you're saying, where
yeah.
when you're talking about it, it's more somebody who's just, I can't go on in the pace that I'm going in. So I'm using this not as like something that's added to my life. I'm using this more as like just a complete escape.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we start to, as therapists, dissociate in some way, right? Because you can't take on that much emotional depletion, I think, into your psyche and into your body without it needing to do something with it, to go somewhere. So it makes sense that after, I mean, I remember after a hard day of therapy, or even not even a hard day, it was just listening intently to someone's pain or situation, that I was really fatigued. I think that's the compassion fatigue piece. So
Hmm.
even if everything kind of went well, you had a quote unquote good day of being a therapist, I feel like we still feel really depleted at the end of the day and we don't have a lot of energy because that's just the work. And so, looking at like, can I manage that in any way? And I felt like I could, like before I had children and before I had other demands on me at home, where I felt like, actually, I need my emotional resources more now because my kids need those from me. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
bring a mom to them that's always, kind of depleted and angry and frustrated,
yeah.
and not bringing my best self to them. And that was part of it for me, really, was knowing that I needed to make a change for them.
I really respect that. I mean, because like, prioritizing your family makes a huge amount of sense at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Prioritizing yourself, and then also what's most important to yourself, which for you is your children and your
Yeah.
family.
100%. 100%.
And then I would imagine for you and for other people, if you are at that place where it's like you just completely got burned out. And again, I think of Severance and I think of how ultimately, spoiler alert, um, all the characters who are the innies are trying to escape, are eventually trying to say, like, I don't want to be here
Yeah.
anymore. And we're seeing, that this is not great. We got trapped here. We got duped by somebody that's wanting to live this amazing life and make us do all the grunt work. We got to get out of this agreement that just is not, we're not on the winning end of this agreement. Um, but then shifting back to your life and the people that you're working with, I would imagine, is there some things that you give them and offer them to help them so they're not just going to go into another career or another job or another role, but then be at risk of doing the same things perhaps that just led them right into burnout space to begin with?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I always think of burnout as a systems issue, right? So I have to kind of back up the train, let's back it up just a little bit, because I feel like, yes, we know there's interventions that are helpful from research for burnout, like, doing mindfulness interventions, doing self-compassion interventions can be helpful. So I think individuals and therapists, we need to think about that and know that, right? That there are things that we can do to empower you, so it's not hopeless. And at the same time, both and we operate in a system that also is really the catalyst for this burnout. So, like as I said in the beginning, if 60% of the US population feels like they're struggling with burnout, then it makes sense that we too are feeling like from whatever system we're operating in, that we're also feeling the effects of that. So, thinking of the systemic perspective is very important, especially with burnout, because what I feel like happens is most therapists I work with just have this sense that I did something wrong. I got it wrong. I didn't do enough to take care of myself. Like I know how to take care of myself and do myself, quote unquote, self care. And, I don't think we have this perspective for like other like veterans, right? If they were exposed to trauma, we don't say like, why do you have PTSD? Like, why did that happen? Like, we just like, oh yeah, they were
You're
in
in
war.
battle and you didn't get killed, but you saw this horrific stuff. Now you have PTSD. Oh, you
Right.
didn't do enough to prevent it. You didn't do enough in that moment, right? Like
But
we would
we
never
do
say
that to
that.
ourselves, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like we were thinking, what are the reasons I'm burnout? What are the reasons I have depression? What are the reasons I have vicarious trauma? Except what are the causes that you have burnout? What are the causes that you might have depression? What are the causes that you're struggling with, whatever you're struggling with, panic attacks, whatever. And I think because we're trying to it out when it just happens, right? The work causes this to happen to us. The system we operate in causes us to have these symptoms, right? And there's support out there, there's help. The individual has to see that and say, like, okay, this system is making me sick or the situation's making me sick. And I have to, myself, I have to take that on myself now to kind of get myself out of the system, out of the situation.
So I have two responses to what you're saying.
Hmm.
And a little third one, which is yes. Yes, yes. But the two responses are one, I think EMDR and IFS would completely see it the same way and would say that the symptoms are really trying to say to us some piece of wisdom. So it's like we're in a situation that's causing some kind of distress or something in our body, and the symptoms are really just a way that our body is trying to communicate to us that something's not right.
Yeah.
And then the other piece was, and this is more of a question for you, but I was thinking that you're right. It's absolutely the system. If we're going to look at ourselves and what maybe puts ourselves in that risk category to be burned out, and I'm personalizing this, so some of this is me projecting, but I wonder if there's a feeling internally of somebody feeling like I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. And the only way I could compensate for that, or the way that, the answer that I have is to do more, to be more, to get ahead,
Mm.
or to have more hours, see more clients, whatever that is. And if it's like we're trying to fill something in ourselves, and so some of the answer is to really turn towards that part of us that's feeling that way and to let them feel heard and seen and maybe even unburdened enough so that they feel worthy. So we're not getting that worth externally by killing ourselves in the job, whether it's for
Mm.
accolades or whether it's through, I'm going to prove myself through, um, again, the productivity or something tangible, money. But I wonder if that's sometimes a big piece of it is people trying to fill that hole of worthiness. And it's if you're not feeling it, and we're all worthy, but if from your own childhood traumas or messages that have been given, if you have this feeling of unworthiness that you then try to fill by doing more and doing more and doing more, I feel like that could be a road, a quick road to burnout as well.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's in, thinking of like that core kind of belief or, if we're thinking like in an EMDR lens, like potentially like what is that core thought or that core emotion? I think a lot of therapists sit with feeling like that brokenness, like like they often compare like other therapists can see 30 clients a week. Other therapists seem like they can hold this. I can't hold it. And I tell them often like that's burnout. That's compassion fatigue. That's that's what I hear day in and day out. And they're like, oh. Like it's hard, I think, for therapists to see that I think we tend to internalize, we tend to personalize and take it as a personal failing or something that's shameful or wrong with us versus seeing it as, oh, well, the system I'm in, this telehealth company I'm working for, often I get emails from people, poor therapists, especially new
Mm.
therapists, which mm, I hate it for our new colleagues that are facing some
Well,
of
no,
this,
I,
right?
I think what you're saying, like part of me is like, I kind of have this feeling of like, if I feel it, I'm going to be truthful and authentic and say it and let it, hopefully help whoever it's meant to. But maybe what you're saying right now, it's a chance for us to pause on something important that you and I, as people who've been in this field for a little while, could really caution new therapists on,
Yeah.
because I think you're talking about something that looks enticing, but could really, in effect, be quite dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend any of them at this point from what I've heard. It seems like they all have. I mean, I know that some therapists rather work, for like, I don't know, Headway and Alma to get clients and referrals. And that's a little bit different than some of like,
I'm always
yeah.
getting stuff from BetterHelp.
Oh, always,
Yeah.
as a podcaster, they're always, when I listen to like the bigger podcasts, are advertising everywhere, how
Yes,
therapy is
yes.
great and we're going to get you this great BetterHelp therapist, which I know they pay them like $30 an hour at any rate. So I understand that often new therapists want to work in a role that seems easy, right? Like they could do this from home but they
Oh,
don't
they'll give you
realize,
all the clients you want. They'll fill
yeah,
you
but there's
up.
all these productivity demands. And I'd much rather see someone, join a local group practice that, will be very upfront about the split, how much will you get paid. And I feel like there's local group practices that are doing this well. But I feel like with some of these conglomerate practice or the telehealth, you know, tech bro companies are really exploiting our labor and really underpaying therapists, and therapists are burning out. The highest burnout we actually see is in our younger therapists. So higher rates of burnout are in our newly licensed clinicians. So it's really important that we speak to them because they're often experiencing that more. So it's newer clinicians and then kind of mid-career, later, like not later in life, but more mature clinicians, we don't experience it as much, probably because like maybe we figured it out, maybe we had our little bout of burnout and we kind of made a pivot or whatever we needed to do. But I think for the newer therapist, it is very important to think about, and Gen Z in general. So Gen Z in general experience more symptoms of burnout in the general population. I just think, they were the advent of social media and smartphones, and they grew up in this world that I, as a millennial Gen Xer, I didn't really grow up in. And so also like with their financial, like the financial earning capability is very different.
Mm,
They have more debt. They maybe don't own a home because they haven't been able to purchase a home. And it's like
right.
the cost of living right now. So I just think, just to think of that, if you're listening to this, you know, newly licensed clinician or pre-licensed clinician, I see you and I get that it likely seems really hard right now, but there are other choices. So thinking about, could I look at a group practice or could I, talk with a clinician, a senior clinician who would give you some insight in your area and talk with them about the options available to you?
Do you find, Jen, that when you're working with clinicians that are just newly in the field, but more often than not, that it's not that they necessarily need to leave the field and try something different, but that with them, it's more about finding the right home for them and the right support to help them succeed?
Both and always. So both and, I think they could do that. They could need that, right? They need a good home to land in. And then we also there's also interesting data that people never make it to licensure.
Mm,
Either they're leaving like on internship because they're like, I can't, this is ridiculous, like what's being asked of me. And this is a lot of demands on me. I don't have the research in front of me of the clinicians who don't make it to licensure, but that's also an issue that we think
wow.
about. That the nature of work has changed, and also like how we perceive. I think the pandemic had, for better and worse, right? The pandemic
Mhm.
shifted our relationship to work because I think it had us really existentially think about our lives. What do I really want? What do I want out of my relationships? What do I want out of my life? What's most important? And
Yeah.
so that's a great, those are great questions, but it also, we apply that to work and we apply that to the work that we're doing. And again, if the exchange is not there for us, if we're not feeling like we're doing meaningful work and we're being well compensated for that, there's a mismatch there. And so could that be, well, I still want to do this work. Well, maybe I need to think about, I need to get paid more to feel like this makes financial sense for me, that I could see less clients, for example, or
Right.
get additional training so I can, do some other type of work, whether that be EMDR or IFS or whatever. Yeah, I don't recommend you get a certification in burnout though. Let's not do
And
that.
no, why not?
Well, I just find if that is your escape hatch, right? If you're like, I'm going to get the certification as my escape hatch to pivot into something else, I just
Mm.
feel like you're spending more money and you're not sure if you want to be a therapist or you're not sure if you want to do the work. I'd much have you
Like make sure
think
you want to do it first, then go
right.
for it.
Then if you're like, if you've had reflection, you've given yourself that break, then you have my blessing. Move forward.
That
Not that
makes a
you
lot
need
of
it. Not
sense.
that you need it, but
But that's nice to have. I totally misunderstood. I thought like maybe you get a certification in like working with burnout. Like that could be another certification that people could get to really understand this world of burnout. I wonder if I'm hearing you correctly. It sounds like there is a connection perhaps with burnout and social media and the technology that we have now. And I heard something that the newer and not to put anybody down, that something came up on the computer where I was looking at like how to label all the different generations and Gen
mhm.
X's and what that meant. And so something came up that after 2000s, you could also be called a screenager. And because just your life is
Interesting.
just built on screens. And
Yeah.
hopefully I'm reporting that accurately. But, I wonder if this is leading to more and more burnout, and we're only going to see the numbers of people burning out increase over time because of the,
Yeah.
addiction to screens that we all seem to have.
Yeah, I love Cal Newport's work on slow productivity and some of his strategies, which, brought me back kind of to my neuro rehab days. So when I worked with folks post TBI, their brains were so overwhelmed, they literally could not engage in work activities for more than maybe like it depended on the person, right? Like maybe some people like post injury, it was like 30 minutes and they had to take a nap for an hour. Or some folks, it was like 2 hours and they were toast for the day. So I really had to titrate and think about like how much can your brain and body really do. And I think of that lens through burnout. Like when you get to chronic depletion, just think of that chronic depletion. So burnout is a multiple system event in your body, right? So we know that there's metabolic conditions, there's chronic stress that's the number one cause of physical health problems is chronic stress, right? So there's multiple systems in the body that are probably implicated at this point. And so it's like all hands on deck. We need to think about medical interventions, social interventions. So really kind of getting back to basics and, thinking of that screen as part of it. So Cal Newport talks a lot about, even a simple thing of like having the phone Fourier method. I'm going to plug my phone in like a Fourier or like wherever you plug it in and leave it there. And if I want to access my phone, I have to go back to the charger versus carrying my distracting device around with me throughout the world and like navigating life with this in front of my face.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love his work. I recommend that just like you're like, yes, modern life is crazy. I love his work and he talks about that on his podcast as well.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so true. It's like pocket-sized distraction that you just carry around with you everywhere.
Yeah.
And if
Crazy.
we're trying to get freedom from it, then maybe the first thing is to not have it be attached to us.
Yeah. Which is hard to do.
Well, yeah, now you have Apple Watches. They're literally attached to us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And just flash. I don't know if this is video or we're just audio, but
I guess my question is there any final words that you would like to share, with all the work that you are doing any message that you feel would be important to put out there.
Yeah. I mean, I would say you're not alone in if you're feeling depleted, if you're feeling burnout, even if you're feeling depressed, if you are dealing with mental health struggles, you're not alone and there's help. There's resources for that. And if you can't do this work anymore, that's okay too. Like you have permission. So I think the best place if people want to learn more about what I talk about on my podcast is to find the podcast, which is really easy to find, the Therapist Burnout podcast and all your podcast players. If you want to jump on my list, I have a therapist pen pal list. I always say it like that. I do write back. I'm not a
Cool.
big time yet, but who knows? Maybe it'll blow up and I'll, be a force in there. I hope I do because I
I
think I
hope you
want to
do
continue to
too.
get, I want to continue to get the word out for therapists that, you know,
Yeah,
we can do things differently.
I think that's a really important, positive message. And so we got your podcast and your pen pal letter. How
Yeah.
about your website? That was going to be my last question. Is like,
Yeah.
how could people find you? What's the best way for people
Yeah.
to connect with you?
Yeah. The podcast is easy because you can plug it in a podcast player, but my website is drjenblanchette.com. That's two T's and a E. And I'm
Wonderful.
sure
Well,
you'll link it in the show notes.
yes, yes, yes. Thank you for being here.
It was so great. It was really a fantastic conversation. And, if you have a burnout story, you're welcome to come on my podcast if you have something to share.
Ooh.
If you are in Massachusetts and would like to find out more about my services, you could go to my website, www.empoweredthroughcompassion.com.
I hope that you enjoyed the episode, and I can't wait to bring you the next show. Take very good care of yourself.